call this my deepest truth. Before my first sin, before a single star or subatomic particle was ever spoken into being, I existed in the mind of God as the beloved. Before I was a sinner, I was a son. That's the deepest truth about me. Deeper than my sin is my belovedness. It's the deepest truth about me because it was the first truth about me, and it'll be the last. Before I was a sinner, I was already a son.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Being Formed podcast. My name is Adam. I'm the host of the show, and it's always my pleasure to bring interesting, challenging, heartfelt conversations to you, the listener, as a way of engaging you at the level of your soul. Soul care is a big word we use around here in this ministry. That's what we're about at LifePoint, and that's actually what our guest is about as well. His name is Joe Chambers, and he shared with you at the very beginning of our episode an original poem. That's Joe, that's his heart. He's a deep man. He's an incredible storyteller. Lean in, listen in, and take everything that you can get from this wise soul. Thank you so much for listening. All right, let's tune in to the conversation. Well, hello, Joe Chambers. Welcome to the Being Formed podcast. It is a delight and an honor and a blessing for me to welcome you here today.
Thank you, Adam. It's my pleasure to be with you.
I want everybody to understand right off the bat. Sometimes I'll have conversations with people on this podcast who I've never met before. And it's it's taken a lot of courage for me to even email them, ask them to be on this podcast. And those have been some great conversations, but today's different. Today, I'm having a conversation with what I would call a true soul companion, a friend and a pastor. And so I hope that the tone, the tenor of today's conversation will actually be very conversational. I don't actually have a bunch of questions lined up to ask you in order. I just want to talk with you about journeys. And I want those who are listening to hear from your heart, a pastoral heart, a heart of a man who has experienced life in the wilderness, on the journey with Jesus, the highs, the lows, the pain points, the suffering, and give us some of your wisdom. That's what I'm really hoping for, Joe. So as we begin, I want to ask you just a question to kind of ease us in, I think, to this conversation. The question is, how is it with your soul?
How is it with my soul? I feel that my soul is as well marbled of a soul as I could ever imagine. I mean that because I think that there's some textures to my soul these days that you would hope after all the years I walk with the Lord I would have. I'm excited about the next chapter that I'm moving towards. I told my wife the other day, if you're familiar with the critical journey, that I feel myself slipping into stage 6. And that's how I said it. I'm slipping into stage 6, the life of love. And I'm running out of ambition to do much of starting anything new, of writing anything new. So much of how I feel right now is I just would love to sit on my deck and listen to your story and look up at Mount Princeton and be present with you. I'm not there yet, but I'm slipping that way.
Beautiful. You talk about Mount Princeton and your deck. Tell everyone where you get to live.
Yes, I live at 8,800 feet on the side of Mount Princeton. It's 14,190 feet, something like that, in beautiful community of Buena Vista, Colorado. And my house is situated to where I have a deck that I can sit on and look out at the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a wonderful place. I'm kind of out 7 miles from town, and there's nobody close to me. So
Mm-hmm.
that feels really good. It's a great place to retreat. It's a great place to do soul care. And, I used to, when I lived in the Seattle area, and then back in when I lived in the Denver area, during the course of a year, I would get restless. I would call it the call of the wild. I get this urge. I need to get to the wilderness because I love to backpack and mountain climb
Mm-hmm.
and all that. I moved here 10 years ago, and I don't have that itch anymore because all I have to do is step off the deck, and I can walk for miles and not see a soul. And
Mm.
so it's um it's I never dreamed that I'd be able to live in a place that feeds my soul. There was a book I read years ago called The Geography of Grace, and you might have remembered that book too, Adam.
Love it.
And I don't know that this fits with the theme of the book, but I feel like every time I get to be out in the wilderness close to my home, it's geography of grace. It's just a place
Mm.
of deep, deep meaning to me.
Mm. Mm. My favorite image of that book is that grace flows downhill and pulls up at the lowest places.
Yeah, I love I think, I can't remember who said it, but, grace is like water. It follows the path of least resistance.
Mm.
And I, I find that to be true. If I just don't get too resistant of the Lord, grace flows down to that deepest part of
Mm.
my soul. So, yeah.
When you talk about doing soul care from that place where you live, what do you mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me, Adam, soul care with others is to provide a space where a person could feel the unhurried presence of another soul. Um, a popular term now is a non-anxious presence, but I want to say it differently. I think the unhurried presence of another soul. I believe we all need an empathetic witness to what God is doing in our soul. And even just knowing that someone is sitting with me in the moments, the bright moments and the dark moments, has a way of, um, I think, ex- um, adding to what God's doing. And so, for me, soul care is sitting with someone and listening to their soul, listening to their story, and just being very aware of the person who is sitting across from me is an image bearer of the King,
Mm-hmm.
and I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel heard. I want them to feel like somebody is paying attention. Simone Weil said that the attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And that to me is what soul care is that I'm paying attention.
Mm.
It's not all that it is, but it's a large part of it.
Mm-hmm. Have you read the book? I think it came out in 2024 called Theo of Golden.
No, I have not. Sounds like it's on my list now, though.
It is, and I hope it's on everyone's list who just heard me reference
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah.
When you talk about listening, that listening, unhurried presence, that is exactly what this
Hmm.
book is about.
Wow.
And the captivating nature of somebody who shows up into a town called Golden, a little mysterious. Nobody really quite knows why this person is there.
Hmm.
But from what I can tell, I'm not finished with the book yet. So I'm giving a half recommendation, right? But from what I can tell, this book ought to be read by just about everybody who is engaged in the soul care,
Mm-hmm.
spiritual direction, in terms of what it's really like to be what you just talked about,
Hmm.
an unhurried presence.
Some of that comes from what I long for from others.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was C.S. Lewis that said to J.R. Tolkien that if we want to if we want to read good books, we're probably going to have to write them, and to write the books that you want to read, kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that part of that is true for me. I long for someone to be in a non-hurried presence with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of what motivates me to want to give that away. But there's a line in an John O'Donohue poem that says, "Learn to linger around someone of ease who feels they have
Mm-hmm.
all the time in the world."
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the epitome of what it means to sit with someone and pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And we give that away, you know. And it's also not completely altruistic, Adam. You know this. There is something about sitting with someone in that unhurried moment that also is feeding of your own soul, and
Mm-hmm.
because you're slowing yourself down and you're walking together with someone. You're on a journey together,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's edifying to you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I shared that part from John O'Donohue's blessing recently with a directee, and I also included the line before it that says something like, "Stay away from those vexed in spirit," something along that line.
Stay clear of those vexed in
Stay
spirit.
clear of those vexed in spirit. What was so funny when it was over, the directee was just kind of like, "Yeah, I think I'm the one vexed in spirit." And I said, "Well, that's very true. I feel that too." And so, to your point, Joe, yes, something about being present to others and listening well and tending to the soul of others is also what is, in fact, tending to my soul.
Yeah, but I even back to that funny line about being vexed in spirit. This is a part of what it means to, I think, have soul boundaries, right? So, as a minister of the gospel, there are people in my world that are vexed in spirit. And I need to know when I can be most present with them and when I cannot be.
Mm,
And so part of exercising soul boundaries is to stay clear of those vexed in spirit.
mm-hmm,
Not all the time, otherwise I'd be living as a hermit.
mm-hmm,
And and I also have found that the Church of Jesus Christ tends to attract vexed in spirit people. And so I can't be away from them all the time, but I need to be wise enough to know now's the time for me to stay clear. It's usually around the area of exhaustion when I'm not at
mm-hmm,
my best, which
mm-hmm,
is the title of that blessing for one who's
mm-hmm,
exhausted.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's a good place for me to exercise some boundaries for my own soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I think to understand too that um, one of the reasons why we get exhausted, especially if we work in ministry circles, is if we're not careful, we can step into the role of being the ones who need to fix others.
Mhm.
And so sometimes when we step into places with those who are vexed in spirit and we can't seem to pull away, we don't have good boundaries, it's because we don't understand what's God's work, what's our work. And sometimes we need to let God have a chance to do God's work in someone's life.
Very true.
Mm.
Yeah, and one of the things that has helped me a great deal is to come to accept the reality that I can't help everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
Mm-hmm. Joe, on your website, josephochambers.com, this is where you write. Do you also have a Substack, by the way?
No, not yet. I haven't
Okay.
figured that out yet.
Okay. Well, you may not. I mean, if it
I
keeps
may
slipping
not.
into stage 6, you might not need to, but
I know the Substack is out there. I just don't know much about it. So
that's right. It's confounding to me. There's so many people I would like to read, and as long as they're offering free subscription, great. But I can't
yeah,
pay.
I hit the paywall and I keep moving. So
So, well, on your website, though, on the About page, you say this: "I don't believe anyone remembers and applies anything apart from stories. Therefore, I'm always looking for and seeing stories in all of life. I love that statement.
It's
I don't know
pretty
if that
it's
statement
pretty
is still
bold,
true.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bold statement. I don't believe anyone remembers anything or applies anything apart from stories. I do think there is some truth to that, and the reason why I bring it up, Joe, is because I just would like to invite you to share some of your story
Mhm.
with us.
Well, I I'm a third generation Baptist pastor, and um, my I don't remember not loving Jesus. I've always loved Jesus. I always wanted to be a minister. Well, I didn't want to be when I was a teenager. That was the last thing I wanted to be. But I did want to be when I finally aligned my life back with the Lord in my early 20s, 21 or so. I wanted to be a pastor. The funny thing about it is, it's a strange journey. Um, I resisted the idea of being a preacher because my dad was a preacher.
Hmm.
But I've always been fascinated by stories, and so I wanted to be a writer.
Hmm.
And when I went to college, I was going to major in Bible and minor in English and be a writer. In those days, in the mid '70s, Christian fiction was not very. You didn't hear much about it. So I thought that's what I would be. I would be a Christian Louis L'Amour or Zane Grey or something like that. But this is typical of Joe. I found that the technical part of writing, the discipline of writing, of not having run-on sentences and putting the comma in the right place, and you didn't have autocorrect, you didn't have, the AI work that you have now, Microsoft, none of that. So you had to know where a comma went versus a semicolon, and it was beyond me. So what I did find out though is that I can talk pretty well, and so I can tell stories.
Hmm.
And so I found that being a preacher was easier to fulfill that creative outlet. And so that's kind of the direction I went. I took the path of least resistance, and became a pastor, became a preacher. And that was fine. I think God used that as a part of my calling. But I've often wondered what would have happened had I really paid attention to the writing piece
Hmm.
and spent most of my life doing that as opposed to speaking. But you can always look back on life and think, what if, what if, what if? But I I loved being a pastor and was relatively successful at it. Not in a megachurch way, but in a pretty good medium-sized church way. And then in my late 40s, I kind of went off the rails in terms of my vows to my wife and to the Lord, and had to step out of ministry. And I was out of ministry for 7 years. And in that time, I was in the wilderness, I guess. My wife and I had repaired our marriage, and we were walking well with one another, but not fulfilling any kind of calling at all. And I do remember thinking that if I ever got an opportunity to help someone who went through what I went through and what I put my wife through, that I would be available to do that. And I had no idea what that might look like. I thought it might be a restoration ministry of some sort. But one guy asked me this probably 15 years ago, and the question was, do you want to be the one who does the triage after the accident, or do a little bit of work before the accident so the triage isn't as necessary? And he was talking about preventive work. And that's what introduced me to soul care. Is there a way that we can live differently, that we don't have to have so many self-inflicted wounds? And so I put me on a quest, really, to explore the idea of living living the faith a different way, so that I minimize the self-inflicted wounds. We're still going to get stuff's happening to us, right? We're gonna get cancer. We're gonna have challenges. We're gonna have businesses fail. Our ministry may not always be up and to the right. Those are just a part of life, right? But when we self-inflict because of hidden addictions or inappropriate, coping mechanisms, that's what I wanted to say. Is there another way to live to where that's not our first option? And so that kind of moved me in the soul care area. And then I got opportunity to go back into ministry as a pastor, and it just dovetailed really well together, which is about the time I met you. And we connected and had our friendship begin there. So I don't know if that narrative arc kind of is a part of it, but I also have to say this. I went on a hike, the Pacific Crest Trail through Oregon, and on one of those, I did that for 30 days, 15 miles a day kind of thing. And I listened to a book on audio book while I was walking down the trail, and it was a Steve Smith book. It was Soul Custody. And as he was describing what soul care was, I finally found a way to put language to what I'd been trying to do. And I reached out to Steve after I got back from that trail, and then got invited to Potter's Inn, and that's where I met you.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole audio book kind of coalesced everything, and I went, that's what I want to do. And I can't remember when that was. This must have been 2013. But that's when it really started kind of coming together for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you came back to Colorado, um, back into full-time ministry.
Yeah. I went back into full-time ministry in June of 2007,
Okay.
and as an executive pastor of a small church plant. And then the pastor moved away, and they asked me to be their pastor. And so I pastored from 2008 to 2015, and then 2015 moved
Mm-hmm.
to Buena Vista and have been pastoring here at this church for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
10 years in May. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and that gives me an opportunity to, I went through the Soul Care Institute at Potter's Inn. I started working with Crossroads Christian Counseling of the Rockies here in Buena Vista. And we have a soul care track that we do alongside with some clinical therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a ministry couple comes to Crossroads, they get 15 hours a week with a licensed clinical therapist. And then if they're in ministry, they have the option of adding a soul care track.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to spend about 10 hours with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been one of the highlights of my life to be a part
Mm-hmm.
of. And I'm going to continue to do it after I retire from pastoring the church.
Mm-hmm. Which is coming up soon.
Yeah, end of May. End of May. I just thought it had a nice ring to it. 10 years as a
Mm-hmm.
pastor of this church, and I'm at that age where I still have a lot of go in me,
Mm-hmm.
but I also don't really want to. I don't want to run an organization. I'd like to sit with people and listen to their story and
Mm-hmm.
tell them a story or two.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about when we met, and that was at the Potter's Inn. I guess it was the first time you were there.
Yeah.
And I overheard you use a word that really, I think you were sitting at one table talking with some people telling your story. I was at another, but I heard you use the word restored or restoration. And that caught my attention. I remember after lunch, I went over to you and I said, I think I would like to go on a walk with you. And can we maybe share our stories? There's something about my story I'd like to share. And I have a feeling that maybe there's some ways that which our stories, we could hear each other's stories well. And we did. We went on a walk.
Yeah.
You listened to my story in exactly the kind of way that you've described already on this conversation, that you'd like to be an attentive, slow, easy, patient, unhurried presence. And you were. Thank you.
Yeah. And it was reciprocated. And, that's why we have companions for the journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I needed to hear your story. You needed to hear mine. And I was just having a conversation this morning with two friends. They live in a different part of the country, and we were talking about vocation. And I find that vocation, in fact, I put this in my journal last night, that often our vocation, if we follow our hurt trail, we're probably going to find the calling that God wants us to have. And I don't know where I heard the word hurt trail, but it stuck with me that sometimes the places of my deepest pain and sorrow are the places where God wants to bring the deepest healing in other people's lives. This is a little bit about what Henry Nouwen talks about in Wounded Healer. As long as I'm making sure that I'm not doing ministry to try to heal my wound, but I'm doing ministry because I have a wound, there's a big difference, I think, in motive there. And I have found a calling in my life that transcends being a pastor. It's deeper than that. And I feel like being a pastor is the highest calling that I could imagine. It's not less than, but what I feel like God is calling me to in the latter years of my life transcends that piece. And it's more of a, I don't know if this is a right language for it, Adam, but a curator of souls. Someone who cares for and listens to, and in the listening to and the sharing of stories like you and I did on that day in the fall of 2013 or so, I think there is something sacramental about two people sharing their stories of sorrow.
What is it about story then, Joe, that makes our story, hearing others' stories, that somehow gets that grace flowing in our lives, and maybe that transforming work of Jesus, I think, becomes more real?
I think there's nothing more welcoming, nothing that says, I really want to know you more than for someone to say, let me tell you a story. And stories are ways of conveying truth. Stories are ways of inviting people in. So there's a hospitality to story. I have said this for years that if you want to gain knowledge, read nonfiction. If you want to gain wisdom, read stories. Read great literature. And I think there's something about that. People that tell me they can't read fiction, I struggle with that, because a whole lot of how Jesus communicated with us was through fiction. You know, the story of the prodigal son, as far as we know, is a story Jesus made up. And yet that story has layers and layers of wisdom and meaning and understanding that are, even to the secular mind, is maybe one of the greatest short stories ever told. And so to not pay attention to the mode of storytelling seems to me to be shortchanging ourselves away from some of the deepest and most profound wisdom ever spoken. So stories to me convey hospitality and welcome, but also, as I think it was Elizabeth Barrett Browning that says, tell the truth, but tell it slant. Like, did I get the author right? I think that I got the author right. If not, fix it in the show notes, would you?
Okay.
But tell the truth, but tell it slant. And that's usually about a poem, or we tell a story, and somehow it gets past our defenses.
That's it, yeah.
And so that's a big part of why stories are so, and they're so memorable. I mean, all my life I've had people say, I remember a story you told. I remember a story you
Mm-hmm.
told. They don't remember my exegesis of the text as a pastor. They don't remember my exposition. They don't remember the quotes. But they said, you told a story one time that I've never forgotten. And I go, well, there was a lot more to the sermon than the story. In my head, I say that. But then as I walk away, I think maybe there wasn't. Maybe there wasn't that much more in the sermon than the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something about story, like I think, also communicates all around us that we're all on a journey. Most of the stories have some kind of a journey arc to them, right? And it helps us locate maybe even ourselves a bit on where our journey is taking us. What has our journey looked like thus far? I think of one of the greatest stories that I can remember, that would, I think, fall in the array of Christian fiction would be Hind's Feet for High Places. That kind of a story is such a journey story, right? And told in a way, slant, right, that helps us recognize who we are. I mean, even the names of the characters. The main character's name is Much Afraid, right? Well, I think there is truth and reality to the fact that story indicates that we're on a journey. And that gets to where I'd really like our conversation to go, Joe. The power of this language of journey. And it shows up in your work. First of all, you have a retreat. And I'd like for you to maybe just share briefly about the retreat that you have been doing for the last few years. And now, here in your retirement years, you're going to be doing a lot more of this retreat. But what's it called? Who's it for? And what's it look like?
Yeah, we call it the sacred journey because journey is a part of what it means to, I think, even walk with God. We're on a journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, Sacred Journey Retreat is for anyone. You don't have to necessarily be in ministry. Increasingly, in the last few years, folks that might not have a vocation in ministry have been attending. But it's a 4-day retreat, a Wednesday afternoon typically to a Saturday noon. And we try to feed people really well with some home-cooked meals. We meet in my home. There's a hospitality factor to coming to our home. The home was built in 1961. It's old. I'm working on it. It's always a work in progress of having to upgrade and put new floors in and different things. But there's something about having it in the home and hosting it that is also a part of it. One time we had a missionary couple who had a brand new baby, 1-year-old. We normally don't have children come because we're not equipped for that, but they couldn't come unless their 1-year-old came. And when we were wrapping up the retreat, she said that every day at our retreat felt like Thanksgiving at her grandmother's house.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, I looked at my wife and I said, I don't think we've ever had a better compliment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think she was referencing the food and the acceptance and the stories and the hospitality
Mm-hmm.
and the warmth of just being in that place. And so to this day, that's my favorite compliment of all that people have shared. We've done 17 retreats, and we emphasize there's a particular way that we talk about identity, finding your belovedness in Christ, and that you are the beloved of God, and then looking at vocation and how your vocation can transcend what you get paid to do. We look at creating a rule of life, a way to sustain your life in ways that would bring you spiritual stamina, and then share a lot of stories and listen to a lot of heartache. And sometimes what has happened recently, Adam, maybe when you came, we've had to make some shifts towards grief. Grief has become a rising theme that either we weren't aware of before, or it's a rising issue where there's been a lot of pain and loss and sorrow and trauma. And I think it was Chuck DeGroat that said that the trauma is not necessarily what happens to you, as much as it is that you're alone in your trauma, that there's no one there with you. And so we've actually made some pivots in some of our retreats to move towards more of a lament, how to write laments, and how to be present in your own sorrow and to witness the sorrow of others. So that's our Sacred Journey retreat. We kind of sometimes we have to call an audible and kind of go wherever the folks are that are there. Yeah, and we try to we don't charge for these retreats, at least not now. And so for reasons that are beyond me, the Lord always seems to provide us with the funds necessary to do these retreats, and because it's not cheap. We have prime rib on Friday night, so that's a expensive cut of meat, and we put people up into some nice homes, and so it's not free. It's just free to the participants.
It's incredibly generous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have to say the home, your home, right there at the base of Mount Princeton is, it is so neat for me. When I was there for the retreat a few years ago now, I think it was. I got to stay in one of the bedrooms upstairs, and there are books everywhere. First of all, there are books in every room. There are books in every little nook and cranny, and and a lot of them are great fiction books, right? So, but there's this particular place downstairs, right off the kitchen, I think by maybe a little wood burning fire stove or something, that I could tell has two little chairs there. I could tell that's your place, and it was so awesome for me to wake up and even see you there. Like you don't get that, I think, sometimes when you go to other retreat places or,
If you go to a conference center, that's not going to be that. But yeah, you get to, if you come to one of our retreats, you're gonna see where I spend time with the Lord. It's either going to be in the winter, it's right there, or it's out in my woodshed. I have a chair and a little. I have a candle out there even. It also keeps the mosquitoes away, but it's still a candle. So I have a Christ candle that attracts the Holy Spirit and repels mosquitoes. So double duty there.
And it gives a whole new meaning to when you say to someone, "Hey, let me take you out to the woodshed."
Yeah, the woodshed is a very special place, and I spend a lot of time out there when the weather allows it.
It's a beautiful name, I think, for your retreat, Sacred Journey Retreat. We're all on a journey with Jesus, and it's in fact a sacred journey. Also, one of the parts of your retreat that I would like to really hone in on is something called the critical journey. You already referenced that when you talked a bit about stage 6. And I just want to say, for those of us who are listening, who are maybe spiritual directors, who have been in this formation world for a little while, we've probably heard of the critical journey and maybe use it, utilize it. But Joe, there's a way in which you walk people through the critical journey that is uniquely you. And I'm going to invite you, I think in particular, to maybe hone in on the idea of the rapids.
Yeah.
Especially in light of what you just said, you're noticing a lot more grief, a lot more suffering right now.
Right. Well, The Critical Journey by Robert Gulick and Janet Hagberg was very formative for me. So credit goes to them. I read the book many years ago, but I have not reread it because I have tweaked my presentation significantly. Because we live in the Arkansas River Valley, we changed the metaphor to a river of faith, we call it. And everybody has a place where you have to put in, usually a very tranquil place, a place where it's easy to get a kayak in or a raft in or a paddleboard in. Here in the valley, they call that a put-in place. And so that we correspond to a place where we are found faith in Christ. So that's our stage one. And then we go down the river. And there's a lot of rivers in the Bible. There's one in Garden of Eden. There's one that flows through the Holy Land, the Jordan River. There's one that flows in the book of Revelation. So we feel like the river motif works really well for us. But in our valley, there are some Class 5 rapids. Class 5 rapids, now, if you're familiar with the critical journey, there is around right before stage 4 and somewhere between 3 and 4, there is the wall. You hit a wall. And when I've taught that for many years, I thought that sounds like it might not be survivable. You know, if you hit a wall at a high rate of speed with a minivan full of kids, somebody's just going to get mangled. But if in the river model, you know, Class 5 rapids are fraught with danger. But they are survivable. There's a good chance. There's a chance you can survive, but not without a lot of fear, and not without some disorientation, and not without some confusion and some loss of control. And so, a whole lot of what the spiritual rapids are for us is that place of confusion, disorientation, a loss of control, possible trauma, and through no fault of your own or through your own self-inflicted wounds that I talked about earlier. And so the rapids we feel like for where we are, a little better metaphor to describe what happens when you get a medical scare, or what happens when a hidden addiction comes to light, or what happens when you get terminated from a job, or a divorce happens, or there's a death in the family, where you're really kind of thinking that maybe the way I'm living life is not working really well. And so I often will say to people that a spiritual rapid can be anything that happens to you that makes you question everything. And when you start questioning things, then that often puts you at cross purposes with a lot of evangelical teaching, because you don't question things. You don't doubt. You don't wonder. You just accept it. And when you're going through spiritual rapids, there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of doubt, and there's a lot of wonder if I'm going to make it. But you also can survive it, especially if you have a guide that knows that stretch of the river. And that's where, when you get on the other side to stage 4 and 5 and 6, stage 5 is the outward journey. Stage 5 people make the best guides down the rapids. And honestly, they're not trying to go down the rapids instead of you. They're just saying, I'll go with you. You're going to have to paddle. These are your rapids. But if you're wanting someone to be an empathetic witness while you go down, I know this stretch of the river. So that's why we use that metaphor a little bit better, a little bit more. We feel like it fits a little better.
There was something also in your presentation of the rapids where you talked about how sometimes you can get to this rapids area and it kind of pushes you back, and so there's a way in which you don't have to go through it. You could avoid it and keep avoiding it.
So I think this is not in Hagberg's rendition of this at all. This is Joe, but I think we're so adverse to rapids. I call it rapids avoidance. We just don't want to go down the rapids. And who does? Unless you're a thrill seeker and you know what you're doing. But just the regular person, when they hear that rumble and they see that mist, that looks scary. And so they try to not go down the rapids. And the more they try to go down the rapid, to avoid the rapids, the more out of control life actually gets. And so in the idea of stage 3 is a stage of production and achievement, and I can't sustain that if that's all I'm really concentrating on. And so I go back up to stage 2, which is the learning life, and I learn more and I learn more, and I drift down and put it into practice in stage 3. And what happens is sometimes I'll get in what we call an eddy or a whirlpool, where we're just cycling between learn, do, learn, do, learn, do. And we try to stay right there because going down those rapids looks a little bit like I might lose control. And so I think that's where most of the people that I see, they're kind of stuck there. And getting stuck in rapids or getting stuck in a stage is where there's problems. And so if you're stuck in stage 2, it's easy to make learning an idol. If you're stuck in stage 3, it's easy to make achievement an idol. And God does not suffer idols well. And so here comes the rapids, and the rapids disabuse us of idols. They take them away. And that's why it's in our best interest to go down those rapids.
And what's the role of guides?
I think it's to be a good witness. It's to be an encourager. It's to be someone who has empathy for the sense of out of controlness. But they're not fixers. I don't like the idea that a guide is going to, paddle you out of the mess you're in. I like the idea that the guide is going to sit with you in the mess you're in. And this is where the metaphor might get a little bit convoluted. But I like the idea that a guide is going to say, I'm with you all the way down this rapid. Let's just go together. Because I think, like Chuck said, that it's when you're going down the rapids alone that's where the real trauma happens. So we want to go with someone.
March 20th, 2025, you posted Praying Through Spiritual Rapids. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was reading. I don't remember where I was reading it. Probably something that Eugene Peterson wrote a few years ago, and it just struck me that this is so profound. And it's one of his books. I can't remember, maybe The Jesus Way or Eat This Book. I can't remember, one of those conversational theology books. But I remember being asked one time when I taught the critical journey. Someone said, "So what do we do to get out of the rapids?"
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a strange question. That's a stage 3 question.
Mm-hmm.
What do I need to achieve, or what do I need to learn to get out of these damn rapids? And that's part of rapid avoidance, right? We don't want to be in them. And I thought it was a funny question at the time because he couldn't hear his own question. But as I sat with that question for a few years and I read some of the readings of Peterson, I thought Jesus did some things when he was going through his place of disorientation. And what if we just did what he did? And so that's where I kind of borrowed some of what Peterson shared and added some of my own. So there are 5 prayers that Jesus prayed when he went through his spiritual rapids. And some of this I know to be true because of Hebrews 5:8. Hebrews 5:8 says, the writer says that, in referencing the Gethsemane experience, the writer says, though he were a son, yet he learned obedience through the things he suffered. And that's always puzzled me. How can the second member of the Godhead need to learn anything? And I still don't fully understand all that. But there was something utilitarian. There was something beautiful about those rapids experiences that Jesus went through. So it begins in the Garden of Gethsemane when he prays, Lord, let this cup pass from me. And I think when he prays that prayer, it gives us permission to say to God, I don't want to go down these rapids. Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. Now, we quickly go to, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And that's where ministers usually camp out. But the first part of that sentence is pretty important. Lord, let this cup pass. So it gives me permission to pray that kind of prayer. The second prayer he prayed was, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Psalms 22:1. And he prays that in the midst of his rapids, in the midst of the cross experience. And again, it gives me opportunity and privilege to pray a lament. I don't want to be here, and I feel abandoned. And I feel like, God, you're not paying attention. And gives me opportunity to talk to God in an honest and real way. Like C.S. Lewis said, to pray what's in your heart, not what ought to be in your heart, right? And then the second or third prayer is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And a lot of times when we're going through our rapids, there are people who want us to hurry up and get through them, snap out of this. You've been here long enough, and they'll give us a cliche, they'll give us a platitude, they'll give us I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His Spirit. And they give us verses, which are all very true, but sometimes they want us to get out of our rapids because they're uncomfortable that we're in there. And so I look at them sometimes as Job's friends, and so a posture of grace is necessary for me to say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then another prayer he prayed was, I thirst. And we're not exactly sure who he was talking to when he said those words, but I believe he was talking to the Father. Even though dehydration was a big part of the crucifixion experience, but I think he was talking to the Father. I think the one who said, come to me, you who are thirsty, and I will give you water you know not of, is now thirsty for us. But it reminds me that the spiritual rapids impact our bodies, and that we need to pay attention to that our bodies do keep the score. And so that was the purpose of that prayer, was for me to pray and around the idea that this is impacting my body. And then the last prayer is, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And this is just a prayer of relinquishment. It's a prayer of acceptance, and it's a prayer of entering into the depth of the rapids so that the rapids can do what rapids do, which is draw us closer to Him and deal with our egos. So our egos can die, and we can find resurrection. So those are 5 prayers that I use, and by the way, they work really well for grief. People will ask me sometimes, how long does it take to get through the spiritual rapids? And I'll say, how long does it take to get through grief? How long does it take to get through the loss of a child, or the loss of a parent, or the loss of a friend? There's no timeline. In some ways, you never get through it. And so, same with some of the rapids. There's no timeline.
Well, doing is not the main goal. I think in terms of like, how do I get out of this? There is a way to be, and to be present to God, and to allow God to be present to us. And I think these prayers are actually beautiful ways of noticing how we can respond in our humanness, I think.
Yeah.
I've taken enough of your time. Is there anything else, Joe, that is just on your mind, on your heart, as we wrap up our conversation today? Just maybe thoughts you've had along the way that you'd like to just leave us with?
Well, the journey with Jesus, I will say this. I'm 67 and a half years old. I've been walking with Jesus for 60 years. I came to faith in Christ at 7 years old. And I feel like I'm just beginning the journey. I think one of the things that I've come to terms with is that death is a threshold, and that we walk from one room to another when we get there. And part of what I'm hopeful for, and what I'm filled with deep anticipation about, is that I'm going to continue to learn about Jesus and what it means to walk with Him in the next life. And I'm looking forward to that part of the journey too. I don't feel like death is the end. I think it's the threshold to a journey that is an eternal journey. And I'm looking forward to that. So what that also means, by the way, friend, is that I don't have to hurry up and get some stuff done before that death, because that's not the end. And so it takes some pressure off. And the pressure is just keep walking. I want to tell you this real quickly. Yes, I do want to share this. I was reading in 2 Kings the other day, and somewhere in there it talked about that God had informed Elijah that he was going to die. He was going to go to heaven. His days on earth were coming to an end. Do you know what Elijah did when he found that out? The same thing he did the day before. He continued to do the same things he did the day before. I find that fascinating. He was going to do the day he died the thing he did the day before that, before he found that out. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that we're living in the presence of the one who created us, and that even though we know we're about to move from this life to the next, I want to keep doing the same things I'm doing, which is an incredible, it's an incredible life-giving thing.
Joe, as we wrap up, how might people find you, get connected to both the Sacred Journey Retreat and to the Crossroads Counseling Center?
Yeah, I would love for anyone that's interested to come to one of our Sacred Journey Retreats. However, the first two of this year are already full. We do have some openings in the September retreat. It's September 17 through 20 of 2025. And I'd love to all you got to do is just let me know that you're interested, and if we have an opening, we'll make sure that you have a place. But I also would like to share that I do soul care intensives, and this is when someone could come to Buena Vista and for a week, and we would spend 15 hours together and do a 360-degree kind of examination of the soul, and that can all be scheduled through Crossroads Counseling, and that's crossroadscounselingoftherockies.com. And then there's also just some spiritual direction / soul care that I'm willing to do for folks. So if they want to reach out to me, they can do that, and you can probably put that contact information in show notes if you want to do that.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Joe, so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Blessings to you.